Hi guys, in today's video, we'll be following on from yesterday's video on creating custom object classes. And today we'll look at how we can create our own constructors so we can control how our classes are used by other parts of the program. So let's jump into Visual Studio and take a look. Just to quickly recap, we created a contact record object. We outlined some properties that we needed to store on that contact. We've got some a date time, some strings, and then we looked at how we could instantiate a new contact record and then assign some values. We're going to expand on that today by looking at something called a constructor. So if we go to our contact record, we can actually create what's called a constructor, which is essentially a function that creates a contact record for us. And we've been using these elsewhere when we've created, for example, let's have a look at the array, for example. So if we create a new string, so we can say a new string list, sorry. So we say var list equals new list string. And we've looked at how actually you can pass in another list of string or a capacity. We could say we want to create a new list of string, but it can only hold 3. And what we're using here is actually the constructor for list of string. And we can actually do this in our own programs and in our own classes. So what we would do, we declare it very similarly to a function. We say public, because we want the constructor to be public. And we say contact record, because that's what we want to return. And then rather than actually giving it a name, we just open and close our parentheses and add our squiggly brackets. And this is our constructor. So by default, even if you don't add a constructor, this empty constructor gets added for you. You can add it and then add some code into it if you need the empty one to have some additional sort of startup logic. But every time anyone creates a contact record and they use this constructor, the code in here will run. And you might actually want to have, like, you know, default values. So if every time a contact record gets created, maybe you want to set all of these to an empty string instead of having them as null or something like that. That's what you do in here. This is kind of like constructors are the setup function for a class. So with our contact record here, one really handy thing that we would always want every contact to have is names. So we could say we want some parameters for first name. So we want string first name as a parameter, string last name as a parameter, and maybe not all contacts have phone numbers or emails or websites or birthdays, so we won't put those in here because we don't want to limit how people use this constructor. We just want to say, if you're going to create a contact, you should at least have a first and a last name. Everything else we'll accept is kind of potentially not available for all contacts. So in our contact record constructor, what we could do is take our parameters that we've been passed and just assign them in here. So we say first name equals first name, and you'll find that you do this a lot. Oh, so that's incorrect. See, I've assigned that to itself when actually I wanted to assign it to this. And this is a technique that is also fairly common. So what you might have is your property names will always start with a capital letter, but then your parameters will always start with a lowercase letter, and then you'll do what's called camel casing, and maybe the first word is all lowercase, but the second word starts with a capital letter, and the third word starts with a capital letter, and you kind of continue that on. And then when you're assigning things in your constructor, you're like, this is the capital letter one, this is the main one, the property, and you're assigning it to the value of the parameter because that's the lowercase letter, that's the one that's coming in. And it's just you find in constructors that you end up doing, you know, thing with a capital letter equals thing with a lowercase first letter, and kind of continue that pattern. So we'll just populate the last name. And actually, here's another piece of sort of useful feature that Visual Studio does. You see here, I've used the first name, so it's turned white. I've assigned the capital letter first name to the lowercase first name, and that's turned white, but I haven't actually assigned this last name to anything. So it's kind of like this gray color. And obviously what we need to do is assign it to the last name correctly. You see that one turns white as well. So that just lets you know that, yep, this is being used, that's being used. And if it's gray, it's being declared, but it's not being used anywhere. So it's like a hint that maybe you've forgotten to do something, or maybe you've pasted the wrong details across onto your sort of declaration there. So anyway, now we've created our constructor, and you'll find that suddenly this is an error. And if we hover over it, it's because it requires a first name and a last name. So you can't have a contact without a first name and a last name. What we could do is we could go and make another constructor. So we've got a constructor here. This one's for first name, last name. We'll make another one, just like before, public contact record, except this time we won't have any parameters at all. And this becomes our default constructor. So before when we didn't have any constructors at all, Visual Studio noticed that and it built this one for us, because obviously all classes need to have a constructor. And if we don't pass one in, it just assumes, oh, well, you just want an empty one with no parameters. But as soon as we specify one, Visual Studio notices that as well, and then it thinks, oh, maybe it was intentional, that maybe it isn't even possible for this class to work at all without a first and a last name. So in those cases, if you do want to offer that flexibility, allow multiple constructors to operate at the same time, then you just need to specify which ones they are. What we might also have is, if we copy and paste this constructor, we'll make a third one, and we'll say, actually, maybe not all contacts have a first name. Maybe you just want the user to be able to put in not all contacts have a last name. Maybe you just want the users to be able to enter contacts with a first name only. So we'll have a constructor that only does first name. And now if we go back into our program file, we'll see here that this is no longer an error. And if we hover over it, well, you'll see we've got two overloads. So if we look in there, we've actually got three. I don't know why I said two. So the first one is the default constructor. It doesn't take anything. The second one is, like we just discussed, first name only. And the third one is first name and last name. So we've got three options when we create a contact record now, because we've set up three constructors. Hi guys, well done for making it to the end of the video. Just a quick heads up that there is a link to the project files from today's session in the video description. If you have any questions about anything we've covered today, feel free to leave me a comment. And as always, I will see you in the next one.